Hello, I'm Mark Sidwell, editor of CapEx, and you're listening to Dispatch, where we bring you the best writing from our unmissable daily email briefings, straight from the heart of Westminster. Read by an automated voice. Don't miss our podcast, The Capitalist, every Wednesday.
Britain is becoming France in the worst possible way. Written by Joseph Dinnage, deputy editor of CapEx. My grandfather used to tell me not to worry about the Germans, as the French were our natural enemies. That may well be true, but recent events across the Channel suggest that we and our brooding neighbours have more in common than is comfortable. François Bayrou resigned on Tuesday as France's Prime Minister after losing a no-confidence vote. He lasted only 9 months. The vote was called in a desperate attempt for support, with Bayrou telling colleagues that he needed parliamentary backing for austerity measures to escape what he called France's inexorable swamp of debt. Bayrou ultimately had just 194 votes in his favour, with 364 against him. Emmanuel Macron has now appointed the 39-year-old Sébastien Lecornu as Prime Minister. Bayrou may be gone, but he was right about the scale of his nation's debt. It is indeed a swamp, and amphibious though the French may be, it will not be easy to escape. Standing at just over 114%, France's debt-to-GDP ratio is currently so high that within the European Union it is only surpassed by the Greeks and the Italians. The markets have responded brutally with higher risk premiums on French bonds. While German bonds carry an interest rate of around 2.7%, the French need to pay interest of almost 3.5% for their debt. The only reason the markets are not even more spooked is because of the belief that the European Central Bank may still swoop in to buy French bonds to stabilise the market. But some believe that hope could be misplaced, as doing so would likely undermine the ECB's credibility. France used to be seen as so fiscally stable that they laughed at the UK during the Brexit years. So how did the country get to this point? Let's start with years of uncontrolled public spending and an unwillingness to accept the political trade-offs of averting the coming crisis. The French state currently spends more as a percentage of GDP than any other developed economy. The cuts proposed by Bayrou barely touched the sides of the nation's crisis. They would have shaved about 2 percentage points off spending. Yet so addicted are the French to their entitlements that this was unpalatable for the public or their politicians. Much of the expenditure goes towards France's extremely generous and highly protected system of old age benefits. France watchers will recall that in 2023, Macron instituted a package of reforms aimed at addressing the country's spending habit and flatlining productivity. Under the measures, the retirement age will gradually increase from 62 to 64 by 2030, and to receive your full state pension, you will have had to work for 43 years, up from 42. As they often do, the French took to the streets to demand that this generational injustice be stopped. This is despite the fact that France still has one of the lowest retirement ages in Europe, and a state pension that is one of the highest relative to the cost of living. This is a European country spending beyond its means, forking out a fortune on paying back its debt, and a population who demand an ever-growing amount of benefits. Sacré bleu! One might say they're just like us. In some respects, our situation is not yet quite as dire as in France. Interest repayments on France's debt are estimated to be a painful 67 billion euros for this year. In the 12 months to June 2025, we spent £16.4 billion on our debt interest. But it should be added that this was nearly double the amount we paid at the same point last year. Whereas France's debt stands at just over 114% of GDP, ours stands at 96%. Though the International Monetary Fund estimates that without spending restraint, our debt will reach 101.3% of GDP by 2034, a figure which would tempt a default. Though I'm sure they'd hate to admit any point of similarity with their French counterparts, when it comes to public spending, the British public are comparatively demanding. The triple lock on state pensions in the UK, by which the state pension rises annually by inflation, average earnings or 2%, is wholly unsustainable. Since it was introduced by the coalition government in 2010, the system has cost taxpayers £78 billion. By 2034, it is estimated that it will cost an extra £10 billion annually. When Labour tried to reform just one aspect of our old age benefit system, proposing that eligibility for the winter fuel allowance be limited, Britain's biddies were furious. At least Macron had the stones to weather the unpopularity and force his pensions changes into law. Our government U-turned at the first sign of resistance and reinstated winter fuel payments in full for 75% of pensioners, the cost of which is put at £1.25 billion. And for what? The pensioners still think Keir Starmer's a backstabber and won't go near him at the next election. The historic unwillingness for centrist governments to stomach the short-term political hit of putting the country's fiscal affairs on a long-term stable footing has thrown politics in the UK and France into disarray. With National Rally topping the opinion polls and Macron's government in chaos, Marine Le Pen is now calling the shots in France and confidently setting out a strategy for economic renewal. Look around us in Britain. The impotence of the political mainstream in taking on vested interests and thinking radically about solving our problems has allowed Nigel Farage and Reform UK to surge and occupy the public's imagination. Almost 3/4 of Britons now think that Reform are doing the most to set the political agenda in the UK. It feels like wasted breath. But if Labour want to avoid a French-style future of revolving political crises and international economic embarrassment, they have no choice but to listen to the pro-growth influences in their party and make the tough decisions necessary on public spending. The same goes for the Tories. If our oldest political party wants to claw its way back to relevance, Kemi Badenoch needs to get in front of the nation's cameras and start laying out a coherent economic agenda. Reform still have some way to go when it comes to their fiscal plan, but they're evidently starting to take policy very seriously. The next general election will come around quickly, and if voters open their wallets and turn on the TV only to discover that they are just as poor after a Labour government as they were under the Tories, the duopoly, which we all assumed would last forever, will be put swiftly to bed.
You've been listening to a dispatch from CapEx, the unmissable daily briefing on politics, economics, and new ideas. For more writing like this, go to capex.co. That's capx.co. And don't miss the next edition of our podcast, The Capitalist, this Wednesday.